Okay, hi, good evening, BIO205 students. Welcome to our Unit 3 review on the immune system. So tonight I'm just going to cover a couple of the big things that you should expect for the Unit 3 exam. Honestly, if you only know what I'm showing you here, you'll probably do well, if not okay on the test. Some of the other stuff might get maybe like one or two questions on some of the other topics, but if you're not able to walk through a case and walk through the first line, second line, third line response, then you're not going to do well. But if you can do it and you don't do anything else because you don't have time to study, you'll probably pass the test just fine. Okay, so again, so the reviews are going to be the first line defense, second line defense, or non-specific, and then our third line defense. And I'll kind of work through a practice case to kind of show you how to work through these cases on the exam. Okay, so the first line of defense. The way I broke this down is between physical and chemical barriers. The one thing I want you to take away is that there's a lot of redundancy in our body. You gotta remember that our um, defenses, specifically our first and second line defense, for the most part are non-specific. So regardless of any infection I might get, the body is going to have very similar responses to it, and the body is also made in a way where it'll have similar things available to defend itself, regardless of where the infection's coming from. So in this case, you can kind of see things like skin, respiratory, eyes, GI tract, and reproductive. That's how I broke it down here. Um, if you look at your physical barriers, obviously the skin, the epidermis, and the dermis. Your eyes, really the only physical barrier you have is blinking. Your eyelashes kind of count for that as well, but blinking for the most part is the way your eyes will protect itself against a an infection or a microbe. But the big three that I kind of want you to focus on are respiratory, GI tract, and reproductive. You'll kind of see that they have very similar physical barriers. So mucous membranes, mucus, and cilia. Respiratory and reproductive have all three. GI tract has mucous membranes and mucus. Um, if the way the test is going to kind of ask you these questions, it's going to ask you, you have an infection. Let's say you ate a bad cheeseburger and now you have an E. coli infection in your stomach. Give me two physical barriers for first line and then two first line chemical barriers. And so on the test, you'll put GI tract. It's mucous membranes and mucus. That's my two. And then for chemicals, I'll say saliva and hydrochloric acid. So you don't necessarily have to know all of them. I'll just know like two or three per barrier. Because that's kind of how the test is going to be worded. And like I mentioned before, if you get reproductive, GI tract, or respiratory, mucous membranes and mucus is the same. If you just throw those two in there, and if it asks you for a third, just kind of think it through. When you have the flu or allergies, you sneeze, you cough. When you have eaten something bad, you typically tend to vomit or have diarrhea. But for the most part, I just remember if you can remember these mucous membranes and mucus, you'll probably do fine regardless of where the infection's occurring. Then your chemical barriers, again, for the skin, you've got the acidic pH, salt, your oil or your sebum. Respiratory tract, you have lysozymes and lactoferrins. Eyes, you have lacrimation or tears. The GI tract, you also have mucus and saliva, but also have hydrochloric acid, bile, some enzymes, and gastroferritins. And reproductive has mucus, acidic pH, and lactoferrins. Again, just look at the focus on reproductive, GI tract, and respiratory, and just look at some of the chemical barriers that are similar to both. Another question you're going to be asked is give me one or two resident microbes and tell me how they protect the host from a foreign invader. So this list is straight from your notes. Some of the ones are very common that we've already worked with this semester: Staph aureus, Staph epidermidis, E. coli. Um, for the vagina, I definitely remember the Candida albicans, um, and then Lactobacillus acidophilus. Those two are very specific resident microbes for the vagina. And so if you get asked a question like that, that's something that you want to go with. And then just remember the three reasons that our resident microbes help us is that they block attachment, they help compete for other nutrients, and they also have their own antibiotic properties to help stop other microbes from growing. Okay, this is usually where I see the most students struggle is the second line defense. I think it comes with maybe people just overthinking it sometimes. Um, Regardless of whether I tell you you have a respiratory infection or a GI infection or a reproductive infection, two second line cells that are involved in every immune response are macrophages and neutrophils. Those will always be there. The other ones you have to worry about that you might have to add information for are eosinophils, which are involved in parasitic infections, and then basophils or mast cells for any allergic responses. Besides that, if I give you a flu virus, if I tell you it's a bacterial infection in the stomach, you should always just put neutrophils and macrophages. I'm willing to bet 100% that you're going to have a question asking you, what are the two second line cells that are involved in every immune response? And I hope that everyone gets that right um, because it's macrophages and neutrophils. The way that this next phrase of the question will ask you, it's okay, give me two second line cells that are involved in this response. Then the second phase is going to ask you, what are the non-specific immune chemicals that these second line cells release? And then it's going to ask you about the processes of those immune cells. So you saw this in your chapter 15-16 case study. Um, for the Monday group, we discussed this in our exam review today. Wednesday group, you'll get this on Wednesday. But for every cell you write down, make sure that you can write down the non-specific immune chemicals and the specific processes that are involved in those. For the case study for macrophages, y'all did fairly well of giving us digestive enzymes, interleukin 1, interleukin 6. The ones that were missing from some students were the complement proteins. And so remember that you do have your complement proteins that the macrophages also help release, and these are kind of how they break down. And then third line defense. I think this is the one where, especially today when we did our exam review, where I saw the most people struggle. It's again, I think not as difficult as we sometimes make it out to be. The biggest thing that you're going to need to decide is this infection inside of our cells or outside of our cells, like in our blood or in our skin, or like in the stomach, that kind of thing. Um, so you're going to see this phrasing. This could be said a couple different ways. So if you are inside of a cell, and specifically talking about our cells, that's also referred to as an intracellular infection or a cell-mediated response. This cell-mediated response or intracellular means that the infection is inside of our cells, which is most likely a virus or cancer. Most likely a virus. And we've only talked about two viruses this semester. We've only talked about HIV and influenza. I'll 99.9% guarantee you the question is going to be asking you about influenza or HIV. Um, if it is a cell-mediated response, then you have, again, you are number one. So it's going to be the macrophages reporting to the Th1 CD4 helper T cells using the CD4 plus receptor. This will activate the CD8 plus cytotoxic T cells and your memory T cells. And then the T cells, so that's the helper T cells, the cytotoxic T cells, they will use T cell receptors to then check on all of our cells to figure out which cell is okay and which is not okay. So I'm not sure if Dr. Cotter mentioned it in class, but essentially our cells can set up a flag that tells the rest of our immune system that I'm healthy, I'm okay, or it could send out a flag saying I'm not healthy, I'm infected, I need you to kill me. So that's kind of what the T cells are doing. They're basically doing, I call it like a task, like a TSA check in your passport. They're making sure that you are supposed to be here, you are exactly who you need to be, and that you're not sick or infected with something else. And then once the T cells find these sick cells or these virally infected or intracellular infections, they will destroy the infected cells using perforins or granzymes. Any other infection, so like I said, it's either going to be a virus or cancer. It's going to be a cell-mediated response with Th1. Anything else, allergies, bacteria, parasites, um, anything like that, fungi and fungal infections, whatever, those cells are usually too big to just be inside of our cell. And so they will be priority 2 or Th2 response. So the macrophages will then report to the Th2 helper T cells using that same CD4 receptor um, and the T cell receptor, right? Because it's still a T cell. The T cell or the helper T will then activate the B cells and memory B cells. And then memory B cells or plasma B cells will use B cell receptors to look for any invading microbes. So where the T cell receptors, the cytotoxic T cells are kind of talking with our cells, the B cell receptors are kind of probing around for any foreign um, microbe that's in our body, and that's how it identifies it. If our plasma B cells find this invading microbe, they will not kill it. What they will do is release antibodies. And these antibodies work in 4 different ways to stop the microbe from infecting us. So one of the biggest ways it works is by process called neutralization. So these antibodies can surround the, let's say, bacteria, and it prevents the bacteria from attaching to like our inner layers, our membranes in the body, or attaching itself to our lungs or our GI tract, whatever it might be. So by creating basically a barrier around the bacteria is not able to actually attach to our body and then start creating damage. The other part is a glutenate. So antibodies work kind of like Legos. So they'll attach to one bacteria, but then remember that most of our antibodies have 2 prongs, and then like IgM has 5. That one prong could be on one bacteria, and then that other prong can attach to another bacteria. And all this does is it makes this grouping of antibodies and microbes bigger so that our macrophages can more easily find it and eat it up. The third thing is optimization. So this is essentially the antibodies releasing a what's basically like seasoning for our food, and it makes that clump of bacteria and antibodies um, much more attractive for the macrophage to eat first before it goes to eat something else. And then remember that macrophages will eat this up until they're no longer able to eat, and then they'll die, and then other macrophages will come in, finish the job, and then also eat the dead macrophage. And then some are able to perform complement protein, or what they call complement fixation. So the complement proteins like C5 through C9, the antibodies can also help those complement proteins determine where they're going to destroy the membrane. So they're actually able to destroy um, those bacterial cells or those fungal cells using the complement proteins. I do have a question in the chat. I want to go and pull that up. Um, let's see. Um, Angelica, do you mind explaining your question? You can throw it in the chat
Hi.
or. Hi,
Yeah,
what's up?
I can talk. Hello.
Yeah.
So on the handout, like I was saying, the steps, there's like 5 steps for both of these, like the extracellular and the intracellular infections.
Hmm.
But they feel really, really long and almost repetitive. Like there's extra information I feel like is unneeded. I'm wondering if those really thorough steps would be best to memorize, or if like a condensed version like this, because this makes a lot more sense in my head, and that's how I had been condensing the
Hmm.
steps in my head. Like if this is probably okay to like study for the exam instead of like that really long, like drawn out version that is like actually on the handout, like our Unit 3 handout.
Yeah, you're
I don't know
talking
if you've
about
seen
page
it.
24, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I would, this is actually, that's a good question. So like page 24 definitely has all the steps you need and
Hmm.
then some. What I did was I took page 24 and reorganized it in a way that made sense to me. So if this works for you, all the information you need is right here. Besides the antibody types, I didn't write the antibody types. But if this helps you study, if you can get this portion that's here on the exam, you'll do well. The biggest thing that you're really going to get asked, and I know you haven't been to lecture yet, but on Wednesday when we go through page 9, um, the way we broke down those questions, they're very like very straightforward. It says, what are the receptors used by the T cells? Ah, it's the CD4 plus receptor and the T cell receptor. It says, oh, what cells are involved? Is it cytotoxic or B cells? And you put cytotoxic or B cells. And then you're going to
Okay.
mention, oh, does it use perforins or granzymes or does it use antibodies? So if this helps you memorize it better, you can use this. It should be um, more than enough for this exam.
Okay, cool. Yeah, because this was how I was summarizing it in my head, and the other one was confusing me more. So it's nice to know that the more condensed version is good.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Again, at the end of the day, it's can you understand it to where you can answer the questions that are being asked? And most of the questions on the exam, they're not going to be short. They're not going to be like paragraph. It's going to be very short answer, multiple choice.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Yep, no problem. Good question. And the last thing that I want to cover here is to know your antibody types. Um, so remember, when we get an infection, it's kind of like our second line cells. So we know that neutrophils and macrophages will always be there for every infection. For antibody types, for any humoral response or extracellular response, you're always going to have IgM and mostly always have IgG. So IgM is our first antibody. It's the biggest one, but it's not able to travel everywhere in the body. IgG is typically our second one that's made, and that can go anywhere in the body, including places like through the placenta. Um, and then you have some more specific ones like IgA. Those are usually involved in any kind of mucous membrane. So if you remember how I mentioned mucous membranes in first line, so IgA, you would see it in the respiratory tract, you could see it in the GI tract, and you could see it in the reproductive tract. And then you have the specifics, the parasites, and the allergies, which is IgE. And if you recall in your notes, we mentioned that if IgE is made, IgG is not made. Um, they're usually a one or the other. So parasites and allergies will trigger IgE instead of IgG. But for most everything else, you're going to have IgM as your first, IgG as your second antibody, and then you have IgA, which will be there for any mucous membrane infections, so respiratory, GI tract, and reproductive system. That's probably the easiest way I can tell you to break down the antibodies. Um, just know that the question on the test might be one of those select all that apply. So you might be given a question about which antibodies apply here, and you're going to be given a list of probably like the 4 or 5 antibodies because I think there's also an IgD which we don't really talk about. So you shouldn't really select IgD for anything if you see it. Really, it's going to be can you just select IgM, IgG, IgA, or IgE, and depending on what infection we give you for that case, are the ones you're going to pick for it. Um, that's it for that one. And a way we can test your knowledge is you might have the four antibodies and you might also have perforins and granzymes. So if you don't diagnose this properly and you decide that a virus gets a Th2 response, then you can kind of see how you're going to start answering all your questions wrong for a third line defense. You're going to start saying Th2 versus Th1. You're going to start saying plasma B cells versus cytotoxic T cells, and then you might say antibodies instead of perforins or granzymes. So when you work on this, I just can't emphasize this enough because I see it every single year. Is this a virus? Honestly, just say, is this a virus? If it's a virus, Th1. If it's anything else, it's probably Th2. Um, I've never seen Dr. Cotter give a cancer on this exam. It's usually a virus or something else. So if you don't see virus, go. If you see virus, it's Th1. If you see anything else, just go Th2, plasma B cells, and antibodies. That's probably the best advice I could give you for this one. And I just want to re-emphasize it because every year I see people mixing the responses where they'll say it's Th1 and then they'll select antibodies, for example. Okay, so I kind of have already talked a couple times through here about how these case studies are going to work. Um, so you can kind of see in the way I've broken it down, if I was to give you points for this, so this is an 80-point test. So the first thing I could give you is, hey, you have a bacterial infection in the vaginal canal. Um, the first question is going to ask you, give me two physical barriers and give me two chemical barriers. Or you might have one question that says, give me two physical, and then question two is going to say, give me two chemical. So you can see here for physical, I wrote down mucus, membranes, and mucus, and cilia. And then for chemicals, I put acidic pH, lactoferrins, and mucus. If the question is asked you for two per, that's already 4 points in this one question. And I know sometimes she makes it worth 2 points, so this could be worth 8 points with just two chemicals and two physical barriers. Then the next question could ask you, give me a resident microbe and give me why resident microbes help us fight off microbes. So for the vaginal canal, either Candida albicans or Lactobacillus acidophilus, acidophilus, sorry. So that's 1 point. And then the other point or 2 points could be on um, how the host or how do the resident microbes help defend the host. So in those questions there, that's already 10 points. Then my next question would be, give me two second line cells, macrophages, neutrophils. Okay, let's say those are worth 2 points. That's 14 points. Give us two chemicals or give us a chemical and then a process for each chemical for the two second line cells you picked. It'll probably rate or set somehow that way. So you'll have 2 points for macrophages. Then you'll get points for saying digestive enzymes. Then you'll get points for saying phagocytosis. And for neutrophils, digestive enzymes, phagocytosis. Macrophages, you might also be given specifics like give me two or three chemicals that macrophages are involved release. So then you talk about digestive enzymes, interleukin 1, interleukin 6, any of the complement proteins. And then the last question is going to be about the third line. So the way, remember how I said it, is this infection intracellular or a virus, or is it outside the cell, which is anything else? Once you determine that, you'll determine your type of infection. So in this case, I said it was a bacterial infection in the vaginal canal. So it's a bacteria that is outside of my cell. This is an extracellular or a humoral response, which means I need Th2, B cells, antibodies. That one question, the way it can be broken apart for different steps, could be worth up to, let's say, 15 to 20 points. And that's already a fourth of your exam. So let's say you get two case studies like this. Um, most likely, you're going to have one that's a virus, I like guarantee it, and then one that is something not a virus to make you work through the Th1 responses, the intracellular response, and then to make you work through another question to make you work through the extracellular response to make sure that you understand the two. And then after that, anything on the case study, like we mentioned, is fair game. Um, that first question about, or sorry, the first page where it talks about physical and chemical barriers and what they do, what their functions are, that's always a good page to look at. Um, any of the complement proteins, especially like what does each one do, which I kind of showed up here. That's usually a good question she might ask. And then any of the types of hypersensitivities. So you had the type 1, type 2, type 3, type 4. I believe that was on page 6, if my memory serves me right. Um, but that's something that's good to know of just like how to differentiate type 1, type 2. Type 3 is probably not going to be on the test, so really type 1, type 2, type 4 hypersensitivities. If you can get through, if you understand these, mostly just what I showed you here, and then just review the study guide a few times, you'll probably do well on the exam. Um, but don't skip learning all of this because if you don't understand this, you're not going to do well on the exam, regardless of whether you get everything else right. That's really all I have. The exam does open on Thursday, and you'll have until Saturday evening to finish it. And then Sunday, you have the, I believe, chapter 13 tutorial, and that's our last tutorial. And then we'll come in next week. We'll do our chapter 13 lecture. You'll have one final case study, and then you'll have the exam in your lecture either Monday or Wednesday in 2 weeks. And that's it. Then you'll be done. That's all I have for this lesson or this exam review. Do you have any questions? Does anyone here have any questions before I close this up?
I'm good. Thank you so much. This was super helpful.
Yep, no problem, Angelica. Have a good rest of your evening and good luck on your exam.
Have a good night. Thank you.
Thanks. Bye. All right, thanks everyone. Good luck on your exam. Reach out if you have any questions.